Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Part 4. Methods of Defense Against Psychic Attack. 15. Physical Aspect of Psychic Attack and Defense. We have distinguished the various types of psychic attack. We have described the methods that can be employed in carrying them out, and we have also noted the various forms of delusion, fraud, and autosuggestion that may complicate the issue. We are now in a position to discuss the questions of diagnosis. Let us consider the whole matter from the practical point of view. Supposing a stranger comes with a story of a psychic attack, what should be our procedure? We must first of all bear in mind that there is great need of caution in presuming that a psychic attack is being made. Psychic attacks are comparatively rare things. We must not assume that we are dealing with one until we have exhausted all the other things it can possibly be. Not so long ago, I came across a case of alleged obsession, which turned out to be neglected constipation, and which was effectually exorcised with castor oil. If there are any physical symptoms at all, even if there are no more than a bad color or a bad breath, a diagnosis ought to be made by a qualified medical practitioner, for even if the trouble have a predominating psychic element, its origin may be physical. Septic foci are really centers of decomposition, and as such they open the door to low forms of elemental life, whose function is to assist in the return of dust to dust. Impurities in the bloodstream may poison the brain. New growths or abscesses may derange its functions. These things can only be recognized by the man who understands the body. Other things being equal, the trained man is the better man, and the man with the best training is the best man, and the only place where an adequate training in diagnosis can be obtained is a general hospital. Moreover, should these things turn out badly, the only person who can pull the chestnuts out of the fire is the person whose signature the authorities will accept on a certificate. Supposing the patient turns out to be a lunatic, what is the unqualified practitioner going to do with him? A very large proportion of the cases of alleged psychic attack turn out to be lunatics and hysterics. Incipient lunacy is a very hard thing to detect. Hysteria is very cunning and plausible. A doctor who is handling human nature in bulk every day of his life will detect either of these two conditions much quicker than the layman who has never met them before. It may be objected that it is a very difficult thing to find a doctor who will have a sympathetic attitude towards occultism. To argue thus is to misunderstand the position. The doctor is not being asked to cooperate with any occult operation, but to examine for physical disease, and if he finds it, to treat it. He is no more concerned in the occult measures that are taken for the benefit of his patient than he is in the church his patient attends. If the doctor finds no evidence of organic disease, or some complaint such as varicose veins, which can obviously have no bearing on the mental condition, the case may be held to have passed the first test, and we may feel that it is worthwhile to proceed to the psychic investigation. If the case is a bad one, or the trouble is of long standing, the doctor will probably find that the patient is debilitated, even if there is nothing definitely amiss, and will proceed to treat the condition accordingly. This is all to the good, for the better the physical condition of the patient, the more mental control and stamina he will have. Sleeping draughts, however, should be avoided if possible, and if they have to be administered, then the patient should be watched while he sleeps by someone who knows how to keep an occult guard, and the room in which he sleeps should be purified and sealed. In the ordinary way, if a person who is out on the astral meets with an occult attack, he bolts back to his body like a rabbit to its burrow and wakes up as if from a nightmare. But if the sleep is made unnaturally deep by a sleeping draught, he cannot wake up and is locked out on the astral, as it were, which is the last thing one wants in the case of a psychic attack. If a sleeping draught is considered essential, for it is impossible to go without sleep indefinitely, the person who is watching beside the sleeper should observe carefully any signs that the sleep is being disturbed by dreams, and if he observes muttering or twitching, should immediately perform the necessary banishings and whisper into the ear of the sleeper soothing and reassuring suggestions, such as Ku recommends should be done in the case of young children. One of the most distressing features of a psychic attack is that the victim fears to sleep because he feels that in sleep he is defenseless. Those who have read Kipling's terrible story, The End of the Passage, may remember that the victim of the occult attack therein described always went to bed wearing spurs in order that he might rowel himself and so wake up if he were struggling with his invisible enemy during sleep. There is a great deal that can be done upon the physical plane to help the person who is suffering from an occult attack, and we may as well consider these physical methods while we are upon the subject of the part that can be played by a doctor in dealing with the case. Sunlight is exceedingly valuable because it strengthens the aura and makes it much more resistant. People are often advised to go away into the country on this account, but for the victim of an occult attack to go into the depths of the country may not be the wisest thing, because elemental forces are much more potent away from towns, and if he is threatened by an uprush of atavistic forces, he had better cling to the haunts of men. The sea, too, is an elemental force that is best avoided, for water is an element intimately associated with psychism. Large bodies of water and high mountains should be avoided in choosing a health resort for a person suffering from psychic trouble. The best place is an inland spa. Games, physical training, massage, anything that improves the bodily condition are invaluable, but long solitary walks should be avoided because there is often a risk of suicide. The person who is the victim of an occult attack should at all costs avoid solitude. There is another very simple measure which gives immense relief in cases of psychic interference. It is obvious that the attack is made through the psychic centers. Therefore, anything which closes those centers will render the victim comparatively immune. It is well known how the stolid, materialistic type of person can live with impunity in haunted houses that drive the sensitive person to madness and suicide. It is also well known that psychic work cannot be performed if there is food in the stomach. The best results are always obtained when fasting. The obvious corollary of these facts is that if we want to keep the psychic centers closed, we should not allow the stomach to become empty. The person who is facing a psychic attack should go no more than 2 hours without food. Certain important psychic centers are in the head. One of the simplest ways of checking their activity is by drawing the blood down from the head. This can be done effectually by a hot bath or putting the feet in hot mustard and water. Another important center is the solar plexus. During a psychic attack, this is often felt to be tense and distressing. A large hot water bottle, well filled so that it is heavy as well as hot, laid upon the solar plexus, which is the handbreadth between the pit of the stomach and the ribs, will effectually relieve tension in that spot. Indeed, pressure without heat will give relief, and I have known cases where a firm pad, held in place by a belt or corsets, gave much comfort. Above all things, the bowels should be kept freely open while facing a psychic attack, because there is nothing that puts one at so great a disadvantage as the accumulation of effete matter within the body. All these simple physical remedies are readily available. They will not afford a cure for psychic pathologies, nor a complete defense from psychic attack, but they can give great relief from distress. They enable the victim to put up a much more effectual resistance, and by relieving the strain, they increase his endurance. In many cases of psychic attack, he who endures longest wins. Psychic attacks by human beings are not things which can be maintained indefinitely, because they use up too much energy. There is an old adage, never use a big spade if a little spade will do. Physical methods of defense involve much less outlay of energy than psychic ones. Therefore, it is psychically economical to make as much use of them as possible. Why trouble to exercise the earth elementals with a ritual if you can do it with a pill? The question of diet also requires to be considered in this connection. The widespread propaganda of the Theosophical Society has caused vegetarianism to be regarded as a sine qua non of occult training. This, however, is not the case. The Western esoteric tradition does not make vegetarianism any part of its system, but teaches that a man should partake sparingly and temperately of the food of the land in which he finds himself. Personally, I am inclined to think that occultism and vegetarianism are apt to be an injudicious mixture for a European, the result being a hypersensitiveness that makes life very difficult in our hard-driving civilization. Vegetarianism has to be thoroughly understood and exceedingly well done if it is to be successful, and even so, there is a goodly portion of people who are incapable of digesting vegetable proteins, which are not nearly so easily dealt with as animal substances. Nothing but experience and experimentation can show whether a vegetarian diet suits a given person. Indigestion is not the only indication that all is not well. Loss of appetite, loss of energy, loss of weight, or a flabby stoutness are all danger signals, which, if disregarded, will cause chronic ill health. Vegetarianism may agree with a person well enough at first, but after a considerable period, possibly years, they may find that they are becoming subject to neuritis, neuralgia, sciatica, or one or another of the nerve pains. This is a sure indication that a vegetarian diet is affording insufficient nourishment, not because it does not contain the necessary food units, but because the digestion is unable to assimilate them and they are passing out of the body unchanged. Wherever there is a history of neuralgic pains complicating a case of psychic disturbance, I should be inclined to suspect chronic malnutrition as the case of a hypertrophied psychism. In such cases, it will probably be found that a gradual return to a nourishing mixed diet will bring about a reduction of the hypersensitiveness. The undesirable contacts that have been formed will fade, and the condition return to normal. The change of diet, however, should always be made gradually, lest the digestion be upset. Anyone who is having trouble with psychic disturbance should immediately discontinue all occult practices and should exchange his habitual meditations for the prayers of his childhood, or new thought methods. It is no time to open up the psychic centers when there is astral trouble. The thing to do in such cases is to get back onto the physical plane and stop there resolutely. There was a picture in an old number of Punch, which, to my way of thinking, exactly expresses the correct attitude for the person afflicted by psychic trouble. In front of an old-fashioned four-poster bedstead stands a ferocious female armed with a rolling pin, and from under the valance protrudes the head of her spouse, who says, "Ye may whack me and ye may thwack me, but ye cannot break my manly spirit, for I'll no kamut." If the victim of an occult attack concentrates on mundane things, he is a heart-breaking proposition for any sorcerer. What is the sorcerer to do if, at the time when he is operating the black art, his victim is at the local cinema roaring at the antics of Charlie Chaplin? There is an old saying that one nail drives out another. If in fear of invisible dangers, take up a sport with an element of risk in it. 16. Diagnosis of the nature of an attack. Having considered the purely physical factors in a psychic disturbance, we may now come to the consideration of its genuinely psychic factors. We must always bear in mind, however, that because physical disease is found, it does not necessarily eliminate the psychic factor. A physical condition, such as an abnormal state of the blood, may cause a low form of psychism and put its victim in touch with evil astral conditions. Science may call it delirium or hallucination, but the occultist calls it pathological psychism and can do a great deal to relieve it, either by closing down the psychic centers or by excluding evil psychic influences from the environment of the patient so that the spirits he sees shall be angelic instead of demonic and cause him happiness instead of distress. The psychic centers forced open by a diseased bloodstream perceive anything that comes within their range of vision. Therefore, let us ensure that nothing save what is pleasant shall come near them. We may not be able entirely to keep him off the astral, but at least we can ensure that his wanderings shall be in a safe and pleasant part of the astral. People do not realize the extent to which the wanderings of delirium can be directed and controlled by suggestions whispered into the ear of the sick person. We can companion the sick man in his astral wanderings and make our voice heard among his visions, by our knowledge driving away the evil presences that threaten him and guiding his dreams into the way of peace. At the commencement of our diagnosis, we must distinguish between three broad classes of psychic disturbance: those which are a byproduct of physical disease, those which are due to malicious human action, and those which are due to non-human interference. The first type should be readily picked out by the doctor, if, as has already been advised, recourse has been had to him as the essential preliminary. Moreover, he will also be effective in eliminating the frauds, for people moving in psychic circles and familiar with their terminology may simulate a psychic attack either in order to borrow money or obtain hospitality, or out of pure love of notoriety, a far commoner motive for human aberrations than is generally realized. Frauds usually either fade away or recover quickly when threatened with a physical overhaul. Those who decide to chance their luck are pretty quickly caught out by the man who has served his time in the outpatient department of a general hospital. The diagnosis which the occultist has to make therefore lies in distinguishing between the attack of an incarnate mind and the attack of a discarnate mind. There are two ways in which he can do this, and he ought to use them both so that they countercheck each other. He ought to get at least two independent psychics to psychometrize the case, and he himself ought to make his own diagnosis entirely from the case history interpreted in the light of first principles. It is a great mistake to mix the psychic and the scientific. They are apt to neutralize each other. Let one person do the psychism and another the observation, and let proper precautions be taken to prevent the results of the clairvoyant investigation being vitiated by suggestion or by the thought-reading of previously conceived opinions held in the mind of any persons concerned. It is, therefore, a good thing to send off the specimens for psychometrizing at the commencement of an occult investigation before any opinions have been formed. It is not the simplest matter in the world to take psychometric specimens properly. I have seen a man bring a lock of hair belonging to someone else out of his pocket, where he had carried it about for a couple of days, and hand it over for psychometry. It was, of course, so thoroughly impregnated with his own emanations as to be useless. A psychometrical specimen should be some object thoroughly impregnated with the vibrations of a person. A garment recently and habitually worn, a lock of hair, a piece of jewelry, all these can be made to serve provided they are properly preserved. Crystalline substances, such as precious stones, hold magnetism better than anything else. Metals are also good, whether precious or otherwise. A pocket knife, for instance, will hold magnetism well. Wood holds it badly, and so do paper, wool, cotton, and artificial silk, especially the latter. Silk and linen are good. India rubber is useless. Glass depends for its holding powers upon its form. If it is cut so that it will reflect light, it can be very good. If it is flat and purely transparent like a window pane, it is almost useless. Stone is fair, earthenware poor. An elaborate article is not as good as a simple article. For instance, a marquee ring is not as good as a signet ring. Letters are apt to be misleading because they often contain nearly as much of the magnetism of the recipient as of the writer. Some psychics can work from a photograph, but this method is not, strictly speaking, psychometry, for the mental image evoked by the photograph is used to pick up the corresponding image in the reflecting ether. Great care should be used in taking a psychometric specimen, for it is readily contaminated by the magnetism of anyone who handles it, who is in proximity to it, or who even thinks about it concentratedly. For instance, if while packing up such a specimen for sending off, you are brooding over the problem it presents and working out your own theory, the psychometrist may pick up your thought form instead of reading the conditions of the person to whom the object belongs. The materials which are used for packing should also be free from magnetism. I knew of a case wherein the psychic said that a certain trinket belonged to either a nurse or to someone who had to do with hospitals. As a matter of fact, it belonged to neither, but had been packed in surgical cotton wool. When packing up a psychometric specimen, do it as expeditiously and with as little handling as possible. Take a piece of virgin black or white silk, not colored, large enough to serve as a wrapper. Throw it over the article and bundle it up rapidly, handling it through the silk. In the occult sense, virgin means something that has never been used for any other purpose. For instance, you should not use part of an old dress or a cushion cover. An article which does not lend itself to handling by this method can be picked up with sugar tongs or the points of a pair of scissors and laid on the square of silk in which it is to be wrapped. Pack the wrapped article in a wooden box, being sure that any padding which is used is also virgin. The report of a single psychometrist should not be relied upon. Specimens should be sent to 2 at least. It is also well when sending specimens, and especially when sending a birth hour for a horoscope, not to allow the name to be known lest gossip should be spread about. Astrologers are much too fond of handing round charts and discussing them. I have known some very unfortunate things come about in this way. A horoscope from someone who understands the nature of the work in hand is of great value, for the position of the planets in the heavenly houses not only serves as an aid to diagnosis, but is a very important guide to treatment. It is best, therefore, to explain to the astrologer the nature of the case and the kind of information that is wanted, so that he can examine the chart accordingly. A horoscope is to an occult therapist what an X-ray photograph is to a doctor. While awaiting these returns, and while his mind is still uninfluenced by them, the occultist should make his own independent diagnosis. In order to do this, he should have at least 2 interviews with his patient. In the first, he should hear the case history, allowing the patient to present the facts in his own way, without guidance or leading questions. Immediately when the patient has left, the operator should write out the case history with as much detail as he can recall. It is exceedingly undesirable to take notes in the presence of a patient, because it makes him nervous, for he feels that, in the words of the police court, everything he is saying will be taken down and used as evidence against him. In preparation for the second interview, the occultist should study this record carefully and have its points and sequence clear in his mind. Now is the time to question the patient concerning any discrepancies or hiatuses. This proceeding will reveal the liar, whether deliberate or hysterical, quicker than anything else, for the discrepancies of his second statement will be clearly revealed against the written record of his first. If he is telling the truth, the 2 statements will be in agreement. If he is distorting the facts, he will soon contradict himself. Remember that you are dealing with a person who has something of either the psychic or the neurotic, or very likely both, in his disposition, and that your attitude towards him, and even your unspoken thoughts, will influence him profoundly. If he feels that you are doubting his veracity, he will lose his self-confidence and begin to think that his experiences may, after all, be the fruits of his own imagination. Consequently, he will suppress things which may be all-important from the diagnostic standpoint. It is in this outpouring of relevant and irrelevant detail that you are going to find your clues. There are certain landmarks which you want to look out for in taking this case history, but you do not want to let your patient realize what you are looking for, because if you have won his confidence, he will be very apt to take on your viewpoint, and if he sees you have formed any opinion, he will unconsciously twist incidents so that they fit in with that opinion. Do not allow him to guess the bearing of your questions, and then you will obtain from him an unbiased response. In order to prevent his guessing what you are driving at, do not ask a series of questions elucidating information on a specific point. There will probably be several points on which you want information. Ask questions upon first one and then another of these. For instance, if you suspect that the trouble may be due to the house in which your patient is living, the last thing you want to do is to rouse his suspicions in this respect, lest you should be on a false scent. And even if you should prove to be on the right track, you do not want to disclose the facts to him until you are ready to act, for by increasing his apprehensions, you will increase his sufferings. If you suspect that sex plays a part in his trouble, and he guesses the trend of your questionings, he will immediately cover his tracks, and you will find it very difficult to get at these facts at all. Whereas, if his suspicions are not aroused, he will reveal himself to an astute and experienced questioner who approaches him indirectly, without realizing that he has done so. By approaching thus indirectly, you not only get at the real facts of the case, but spare his feelings. In taking a case history, you want to look for correlations between your patient's psychic experiences and the circumstances of his life. Dates and places, therefore, should be sedulously sought for. When did the trouble start and where? Having obtained as detailed information as possible on these 2 points, set out to see whether any occult significance is to be found in it. Note the dates carefully, and turn them up in an ephemeris of those years, and observe how the moon stood in relation to them, also the planets. Observe whether they fell on or about the equinoxes or solstices. Note also the days of the week upon which they occurred. If you found that all the crises of the case occurred on Thursdays, or round about the vernal equinox, or at the full moon, you would have a piece of information which was of considerable significance. You would be sure of one thing, at any rate, that you were dealing with a case in which the invisible psychic tides played a part. Information should also be sought concerning the place or places in which the different crises of the trouble took place, and especially the circumstances attending its first onset. It is exceedingly useful, if possible, to visit the place and sense its atmosphere. A very great deal can also be learnt from visiting the place where the patient is living. Having obtained such geographical information as you can, study it carefully in connection with a large-scale ordnance map. Access to this and to all relevant information desired can readily be obtained at any public library. Note whether there are any prehistoric remains in the neighborhood, and if so, how the house bears in relation to them. Observe not only whether it is near any of them, but whether it is in a direct line between any two of them. Look up the history of the district and see whether it affords any further information. Roman remains are often at the bottom of the trouble, for the legions brought some very queer cults with them in the days of Rome's decadence. Druid remains, too, should be suspect if they are near neighbors. Inquire also concerning any unusual objects in the house, such as images of the deities of primitive cults or savage weapons. It is quite possible that powerful elementals are attached to these. Inquire whether the trouble seems to lift when the patient goes away to another place. If the reply is in the affirmative, it may safely be presumed that local conditions are at the bottom of the trouble. But if the reply is in the negative, it does not necessarily follow that the opposite is the case. It may also be that the trouble does not depend upon the place, but upon some person residing at the place. Never forget that in the great majority of cases, that person's harmful influence is due to an unfortunate psychic makeup rather than deliberate abuse of occult knowledge. Be very slow to accept the latter hypothesis, for its occurrence is comparatively rare, and even if the person suspected is known to have occult knowledge and can be proved to be antagonistic to the patient, it does not necessarily follow that the attack is conscious and deliberate. It may be unconscious and reflex. It is quite true that an occultist ought to have sufficient control over his vehicles to prevent them from acting independently of his will and consciousness, but this is not always the case. People are at many different stages of development. There is always a difficult period between the awakening of higher powers and their full control. Enquiries should also be made concerning the nature of the dreams and whether the patient is subject to nightmares apart from any question of occult attack. Also, whether he has ever had any other psychic experiences, and if so, of what nature. Finally, a careful enquiry should be made concerning the patient's associates, as to whether any of them are psychic or students of the occult. Be very careful, however, not to cast suspicion upon any person unless you have conclusive evidence, and it is essential to do so in order to save the patient. Remember, it is always possible that you may be mistaken. A case was reported in the papers not so long ago of a man who committed suicide because a doctor told him that he had organic heart disease and ought not to marry the girl he was engaged to. At the post-mortem, it was found that there was nothing whatever the matter with his heart. Imagine the feelings of the doctor who had given this rash diagnosis. A person already upset by a psychic attack will be in a state to jump at shadows. He must be handled very discreetly. Be very wary of announcing your suspicions until they are conclusively verified. When all is said and done, the main object is a cure, not an explanation. It is of little value to your patient to fix the blame unless the matter can be cleared up. He is considerably worse off if his suspicions are turned towards some person in his environment from whom he cannot escape, than if he be left to attribute his trouble to unidentified psychic influences. Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise, is truer in psychic matters than anywhere else. Never open the eyes of your patient to a danger for which you cannot give him an effectual defense. The surgeon who is about to operate covers his instruments with a cloth so that the patient shall not see them. The wise occultist does the same. Do not forget that the unseen is always suspect to the uninitiated. Having conducted an inquiry along the lines laid down in the previous pages, you should have acquired a considerable amount of material for investigation. Examine it carefully for correlations of cause and effect. Note if any exasperation of the trouble is regularly associated with any incident, place, or person. Consider also the various type cases that I have given as examples in the previous chapters, and see if you can find any that resemble the case you are investigating. Note the explanations given, and see if they throw any light upon the problem, or suggest lines along which enquiry might be pursued. Working in this way, you ought to be able to arrive at a tentative diagnosis. If this is confirmed by the findings of the psychics to whom you have sent specimens for psychometry, Then you may feel confident you are upon the right track and go forward boldly. Remember, however, that although the psychics ought to agree as to the main points of their investigation, you cannot expect any complete agreement as to details. They are inspecting a composite photograph of the patient's entire life, and there is so much to see that no one person is likely to see everything. The things in which they confirm each other may be held to be established, but the things which the one sees and the other does not are not necessarily illusionary. 17. Methods of Defense 1. In writing for the general reader an account of the methods to be used in combating a psychic attack, I am reminded of those excellent manuals upon medicine and surgery which an enlightened Board of Trade insists shall be provided for the captains of ships, together with a cupboard full of remedies, harmless and otherwise. When an emergency arises, the worthy skipper reads through the chapter he believes to bear upon the case in hand, and goes to work as best he may. On these occasions, the personal factor is a large one. So it is in dealing with psychic trouble. Wide experience is needed for diagnosis, and specially trained faculties and specially developed powers are needed to cope with the conditions that may be found. This book is more in the nature of a manual of first aid than a treatise on treatment. We must also bear in mind that just as the potent drug is effectual in the hands of the expert, but dangerous in the hands of the amateur, so do the more potent occult formula need special equipment for their use. Moreover, a formula that is used indiscriminately by the uninitiated is apt to lose its potency and become useless. The popular expletive, which GBS introduced into polite society in his play Pygmalion, is the worn-out remnant of the once powerful adjuration, "By Our Lady." Moreover, no two cases are alike, and the clear-cut, typical case is a rarity and treasure. Common sense, natural aptitude, and experience are the exorcist's best equipment. Having made his diagnosis and being ready to proceed to the handling of the case, the exorcist has to achieve three things. He must repair his patient's aura, clear the atmosphere of his environment, and break his contact with the forces that are causing the trouble. These three things are interdependent, and not one of them is first or last. It is next to impossible to get a damaged aura to heal if you do not clear the atmosphere, nor will the atmosphere remain clear for long if you cannot break the contacts. Theoretically, the ideal thing to do is to break the contacts as a start, but unfortunately in actual practice, these often take a good deal of finding and a good deal of handling after they have been found. Meanwhile, something has to be done to keep the patient going. The exorcist has got to clear himself a place in which to work, or if the victim of the attack is defending himself single-handed, he has got to throw up some temporary defenses while he digs himself in. The first thing to do when dealing with an occult attack is to make a temporary clearance of the atmosphere and so gain breathing space in which to reform the shattered ranks. This is more readily achieved by an organized ritual than by unaided willpower. Any act performed with intention becomes a rite. We can take a bath with no more in mind than physical cleanliness, in which case the bath will cleanse our bodies and no more, or we can take a bath with a view to ritual cleanliness, in which case its efficacy will extend beyond the physical plane. We therefore perform certain physical actions not only as a means of clearing etheric conditions, but also as a means of definitely affecting astral ones through the imagination, a very potent weapon in all magical operations. Physical objects become impregnated with etheric emanations and retain them for considerable periods, as a knife will retain a smell of onions and taint everything that is cut with it. These emanations, magnetism as they are called in the terminology of occult science, profoundly affect any sensitive person who is in contact with them. There is something in the old superstition that is unlucky to place boots on a table. It is equally inadvisable to place outdoor garments on a bed. You do not know whom you have rubbed shoulders with in bus or train, so why give their magnetism a chance to contaminate your sleeping place? Fortunately for all of us, magnetism is a very fugitive force, and although it may be potent when fresh, it soon fades unless it has been deliberately created by means of ritual. The terrible atmosphere that surrounds the victim of an occult attack and permeates all his belongings is not difficult to get rid of, though it will rapidly reform unless the conditions which gave rise to it are cleared up. The most effectual way of getting rid of magnetism is to move to a fresh place, taking nothing of one's old belongings with one. This, however, is a counsel of perfection for most people. Fortunately, there are other devices which enable us to attain our ends nearly as effectually. If it be in any way possible, let the victim of an occult attack move temporarily to another environment, taking with him as few of his belongings as possible, and let him make the move in new clothes or in clothes that are just back from the cleaner. Let him, moreover, keep his whereabouts a secret as far as it is convenient for him to do so. There is an old superstition that a witch can be thrown off the trail by crossing running water. It is my opinion that many of these old folk beliefs have a basis in fact, however overlaid by superstition they may have become. I once had a curious experience which gives support to this opinion. I was about to take part in an important piece of occult work, to which I knew there would be opposition. A friend who was concerned in the matter asked me to dine with her on the night before the day fixed for the proceeding. We were both conscious of tension in the atmosphere, and she suggested that I should remain the night at her flat instead of returning to my own, informing no one of my whereabouts in order to throw the attack off the trail. The maneuver was not wholly successful, and we had a rather trying night, and I was conscious of a good deal of psychic tension next day. I decided, therefore, to walk to the appointed place across Hyde Park in order to refresh myself. When part of the way across, I suddenly felt that the tension relaxed, and I was able to go through the work in hand without interference. I told my friend of this experience, and she questioned me as to where I was when it took place. We looked up the spot on a map and found that I had just crossed the underground conduit which takes the overflow from the Serpentine. I did not know of the old superstition concerning running water, neither did I know of the existence of the conduit. Nevertheless, the sense of relief was sufficiently marked to cause me to mention it when I saw my friend again, and to be able to indicate the spot where it had occurred. We have very little exact knowledge concerning these subtle forces, which are the basis of both occult attack and spiritual healing, but we have good reason to believe that, in their nature, they are closely analogous to electricity. They are not inanimate forces, however, but have in their nature something that is akin to life, though a low type. It has been my experience that if we work on a blended analogy of electricity and bacteriology, we get pretty near the facts. As near, at any rate, as our present state of knowledge permits. In other words, if we act as if thought possessed the combined qualities of electricity and bacteria, we shall have a sufficiently accurate method of steering by dead reckoning in the absence of certain knowledge and actual sight. If we consider the various methods used in folk magic of all ages and races, we shall observe that they are in agreement with these hypotheses. Running water, we know, has peculiar electrical qualities, as is witnessed by its effect on the divining rod in the hands of a sensitive person. Whatever it may be that affects the diviner is probably the same thing that affects the occult attack. When we recall, moreover, that running water will throw hounds off the scent just as effectually as it will the alleged witch, we may feel that we cannot be accused of gross superstition if we give the old folk tradition a trial and note the results. Water, again, is the vehicle of purification. It is used in the rite of baptism by the Church and in the preparation of the place by the occultist about to perform a ceremony. Strictly speaking, there should be a trace of salt in the water thus employed, and both salt and water are blessed with powerful invocations when the priest is preparing holy water, whether for a baptism or for placing in the holy water stoup for the use of the congregation. As far as the occultist is concerned, salt to him is the emblem of the element of earth. It is also a crystalline substance, and crystalline substances in their different forms receive and hold etheric magnetism better than anything else. Water, on the other hand, is the emblem of the psychic sphere. These two realms, between them, contain by far the greatest part of occult evil. It is rare indeed that spiritual wickedness in high places will reach up as far as the airy realms of mind or the fiery realms of spirit. If we want to get in touch with or operate upon a particular sphere, we use as base a substance appropriate thereto. Consequently, a solution of salt and water makes a better base than either salt or water could do separately, because it enables us to cover the whole of the sphere of probable operations in a single act. It may be interesting to note concerning the magical properties of crystalline substances that crystals are used in wireless apparatus to pick up these subtle vibrations of the ether. Once again, we are close upon the trail of our electrobacteriological analogy. It is an excellent plan, when trying to break an undesirable psychic contact, to immerse oneself in a bath of water that has been especially consecrated for the purpose, redressing in new or at least clean clothing afterwards, and if it be by any means possible, moving into a different room. If this cannot be done, move the bed into a different position, taking care to turn it at a different angle. That is to say, if you have been in the habit of sleeping lying north and south, place your bed so that you will now be lying east and west. The following prayers may be used for the blessing of the salt and water. Pointing the first and second fingers at the salt. I exorcise thee, creature of earth, by the living God, by the holy God, by the omnipotent God, that thou mayest be purified of all evil influences in the name of Adonai, who is the Lord of angels and of men. Extending hand over salt. Creature of earth, adore thy Creator. In the name of God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of Jesus Christ his Son, our Savior, I consecrate thee to the service of God, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Pointing first and second fingers at the water. I exorcise thee, creature of water, by the living God, by the holy God, by the omnipotent God, that thou mayest be purified from all evil influences, in the name of Elohim Sabaoth, who is Lord of angels and of men. Extending hand over water. Creature of water, adore thy Creator. In the name of God the Father Almighty, who decreed a firmament in the midst of the waters, and of Jesus Christ his Son, our Savior, I consecrate thee to the service of God in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Casting the salt into the water. We pray thee, O God, Lord of heaven and earth, and of all that in them is, both visible and invisible, that thou mayest stretch forth the right hand of thy power upon these creatures of the elements, and hallow them in thy holy name. Grant that this salt may make for health of body, and this water for health of soul, and that there may be banished from the place where they are used every power of adversity, and every illusion and artifice of evil, for the sake of Jesus Christ our Savior. Amen. The water thus consecrated may be used as a bath, or for making the sign of cross upon the forehead, or for sprinkling about a place. When thus using it, the following prayer may be employed. In the name which is above every other name, and in the power of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost, I exorcise all influences and seeds of evil. I lay upon them the spell of Christ's holy church, that they may be bound fast as with chains, and cast into outer darkness, that they trouble not the servants of God. In pointing or making the sign of the cross, the first and second fingers are extended, and the third and fourth are bent towards the palm of the hand, and the thumb laid upon their nails. When the hand is extended in blessing over the salt and water, it is held flat, fingers together and parallel, and thumb stretched at right angles to the forefinger. If there is sufficient occult force at work to produce physical phenomena, it is very advisable to take precautions to prevent materializations taking place. The physical phenomena are of several types. They may take the form of noises, usually creakings, thuds, or more rarely, bell-like notes or wailing sounds. If actual words are heard, auditory hallucinations should be suspected, for in the absence of a medium, spirit messages are given to the inner ear, not to the auditory nerve. Lights may also be seen, usually taking the form of dim balls of luminous mist drifting like soap bubbles. They may be any size from mere points of light to considerable dimensions, some 6 feet or more in diameter. In these spheres of dim luminosity, psychics can generally see forms, sometimes human, sometimes from the animal kingdom. Whitish-gray clouds can also sometimes be seen, rising pillar-wise from the floor like smoke. These are usually fixed to one place and do not move about the room, as do spheres of light. Such movement as occurs being within themselves, like the eddyings of smoke caught under a tumbler. More rarely, a distinctive odor may be noticed, and still more rarely, there may be precipitations of powdery substances or slime. Light objects may also be overturned or thrown about the room. There are certain substances which experience has proved to be effectual in preventing the condensation of etheric energy from taking place. Camphor, dissolved in vinegar and placed in saucers about the room, will cope effectually with low degrees of force, but for higher potencies, nitric acid is the best thing to use, a small quantity being poured into a saucer and exposed to the air. It is best to use it well diluted to prevent accidents, for it is not the strength of the acid in the saucer that is efficacious, but its evaporation into the air, and it will evaporate just as well when diluted as when neat. In what manner it works I have not the slightest idea, but its value is well known among psychic experimenters. The methods of occult attack employed in modern Europe are exclusively mental, so far as my experience of them has gone at any rate. That is to say, they work by the mind on the mind, and only affect physical conditions incidentally. In the East and among primitive people, however, other aspects have to be considered, as a much more etheric type of magic is in use under primitive conditions of life and upon virgin soils. For these etheric operations, material substances are required in order that the magnetism attached to them may be made use of. Hair combings, nail parings, cast-off clothes, objects in familiar use, all contain magnetism. Consequently, care should be taken to see that such things are effectually disposed of when discarded. Combings and nail parings should be promptly burnt. Cast-off clothing should never be allowed to go out of the possession of the owner till it has had at least 3 days' exposure to sun and air in the open. The magnetism will be more effectually dispelled if the garments be laid on the earth, especially freshly turned earth, than if hung on the line. The same applies to furniture. The chair that has been the accustomed seat, and above all things the bedding, should be thoroughly aired and sunned before they are parted with. The same precautions are useful if any second-hand article has been purchased. The disposal of night soil should also be carefully arranged for and entrusted to reliable servants, abundant disinfectants and deodorants being constantly in use. Precautions should be observed to prevent any native obtaining access to fresh excreta. After the animal heat has gone out of it, its magical value has greatly decreased. A dirty handkerchief, too, is an effectual magnetic link, and so are dressings from a wound. Anything, in fact, that bears traces of any of the byproducts of the body. But apart from any question of psychic attack, there are 2 substances which are especially prized for purposes of magic, and these are seminal fluid and menstrual blood. The former is used in fertility rites and the latter in certain forms of evocation. These substances are exceedingly hard to come by in primitive lands, because the natives, knowing their significance, guard them most scrupulously, but the Mem Sahib has no suspicions, and allows stained garments and bed linen to go into the hands of the washerman and to be disposed of at his discretion, satisfied so long as the garments themselves return safely at the end of the week, and never thinking to inquire what becomes of the water in which they were washed. There are many parts of the world in which the sale of these magical substances is a profitable sideline of the laundering business. In Europe, menstrual blood and feces are part of the magical substances of the black mass, being made up into patens with wheat flour. A time-honored method of clearing a bad psychic atmosphere out of a house, and one which I have known in my own experience to be effectual, is to stew garlic about the place, leave it overnight, and then take it up and burn it. Among country people, an onion is sometimes placed in a vase on the mantelpiece, as if it were a hyacinth bulb when unpleasant visitors are expected, and solemnly burnt in the kitchen fire as soon as they have departed, it being believed that the onion has the property of absorbing noxious emanations. It is curious to note in this respect that in one coal mine, to my knowledge, the miners are forbidden to take onions down into the workings as part of their dinners, because the onions absorb the underground gases and become poisonous. My informant told me that he and others had smuggled onions down and learnt from bitter experience the wisdom of this rule. 18. Methods of Defense 2. There are 2 types of practical psychic work which may be used separately or in combination, the latter method, in my opinion, giving by far the best results, though the exponents of each are apt to decry the other. The method, which we will distinguish as the meditative method, consists of meditation upon abstract qualities, such as peace, harmony, protection, and the love of God. It is the method of the New Thought school, and its value lies in the harmonizing effect it has upon the emotional state and its counteracting of harmful autosuggestions. The other method, which we will call the invocative, consists in the invocation of external potencies and the employment of formal methods for the focusing of their force. This method has many gradations of complexity and an infinite variety of technique. It ranges from the simplest prayer, which calls upon Christ with the sign of the cross, to the most elaborate rituals of exorcism performed with bell, book, and candle. The essence of the system lies in the attempt to dissect out from the general force of good the particular aspect of energy that is needed, and the use of some symbol to act as the magical vehicle of that force upon the plane of form. This symbol may be a mental picture of the blue robe of Our Lady. It may be the action of making the sign of the cross. It may be the consecrated water sprinkled for token of cleansing, or it may be some object specially magnetized to act as a talisman. In the invocative method, the aim is to concentrate the force, and therefore some symbol of form has to be employed. In the meditative method, the aim is to escape beyond the bounds of form into the atmosphere of pure spirit, too exalted for evil to enter, and therefore the use of any form or formula is eschewed as calculated to prevent the soul from rising into this pure air. In my opinion, and with all due respect to the practitioners of this latter method, much better results would be obtained if the invocative method, with its utilization of the efficacy of formula, were used to enable the mind to climb into the pure air of spiritual consciousness, where no evil is. It is only those who are highly trained in meditation who can rise on the planes unaided. It is exceedingly difficult to take off from sense consciousness without the use of some kind of psychological device to act as a springboard. There seems to be little object in refusing for purely academic reasons to avail ourselves of a method of proven efficacy. If we realize that the use of forms and symbols is merely a psychological device to enable the mind to get a grip on the intangible, we shall not fall into the error of superstitious observances. A superstition has been defined as the blind use of a form whose significance has been forgotten. On the other hand, we shall be unwise to rely exclusively upon formal or ceremonial methods unless at the same time we use meditative methods in order to purify and harmonize our own consciousness. If we neglect this aspect of our work, we shall reinfect by our own vibrations the magic circle as fast as we have cleared it. It is not much use sealing a circle with the protective names if we allow a panic-stricken imagination to run riot, picturing every conceivable kind of evil and leaving blank spaces for the possibility of inconceivable kinds. Equally, however, we shall find it very much easier to perform the harmonizing meditation if we are working within the protection of a magic circle. To attempt to perform the work of exorcism solely by means of meditation is like raising a weight by the unaided effort of our two hands. The employment of the magical method resembles the use of a lever or a pulley and block. Our muscles are still the sole source of energy, but by the utilization of mechanical principles, we have redoubled their power. Let us then, in meditation, use symbols to concentrate our attention. We shall find this much easier than meditation in terms of abstract thought. Indeed, in times of stress and crisis, abstract thought may be impossible for us unless we are very experienced in its use. But we shall seldom reach a state when we cannot picture the cross and call upon the name of Christ. Occult attacks may be divided into two types, those which take place by means of thought forms and those which operate by means of a current of force. But even in the latter case, the current of force soon gathers itself or germinates thought forms congenial to its nature. Therefore, in every psychic disturbance, the thought form is a factor which has to be considered and dealt with, and which, in fact, forms the readiest means of diagnosis. For it is by the perception of the associated thought forms that the experienced psychic is able to detect the nature of the attack. Thought force is a thing which has no relation to geographical position, but is a matter of pure consciousness and of tuning in to its key note. We can pick up the forces of dead faiths 1,000 years after the death of their last votary, and upon the opposite side of the globe to that in which they flourished, but thought forms are a different matter. They have position in space, and although they can be moved about with the speed of thought and can be withdrawn to the subtlest level of the astral, and there anchored to an idea and thus prevented from impinging upon the planes of form for all practical purposes, nevertheless, although they do not occupy space, they can be referred to definite positions in space. They can, for instance, be associated with a particular object and will follow that object about, remaining within its magnetic field. The immediate magnetic field is anything from 12 to 30 feet, the remote magnetic field from 100 to 300 yards. Powerful holy centers like Glastonbury or Lourdes have a bigger magnetic field than this, extending possibly to a couple of miles. They are also interconnected among themselves by lines of force. These things have to be taken into account in practical occult work. When we are confronted by a disturbing influence emanating from a focus of power, such as the site of an old temple, we have got to deal with the remote magnetic field by means of ceremonial. As this is a method that can only be used by a high-grade initiate, we will not consider it here. For all practical purposes, in a psychic attack, it is the immediate magnetic field that has to be considered. The best method to deal with this is to make a magic circle. A mere banishing by itself is not so effective as a banishing performed within a circle, because the circle will effectually prevent the banished forces from flowing back again. There are various methods of performing this operation, but the principle of all valid ones is the same. The more potent conjurations cannot be given in these pages, because their effective use depends upon the grade of initiation possessed by the person who proposes to use them, and to possess a formula without the grade to which it belongs is as unsatisfactory as possessing a gun without any knowledge of shooting. The formula I will give will be found effectual for all ordinary conditions. Extraordinary conditions can only be dealt with by a person who has had experience. In making the magic circle, the operator stands upright facing east. He faces east because the magnetic current on which he proposes to operate runs from east to west. His first procedure must be to steady his own vibrations and purify his aura. In order to do this, he makes the Kabbalistic cross on breast and brow. Touching his forehead, he says, "To thee, O God," touching his solar plexus, "be the kingdom," touching his right shoulder, "and the power," touching his left shoulder, "and the glory," clasping his hands, "unto the ages of the ages. Amen." By this formula, the operator affirms the power of God as sole creator and supreme law of the universe, to which all things must bow, and he establishes this formula magnetically in his aura by the action of making the sign of the cross upon himself. This sign is not an exclusively Christian symbol and can be used as readily by the Jew as the churchman, for it is the equal-limbed cross of nature that is being used, not the Calvary cross of which the shaft is double the length of the crossbar, and which is the symbol of sacrifice. The equal-limbed cross refers to the 4 quarters of the globe, and the 4 elements and the formula associated with it proclaims the dominion of God over these, and thereby occultly formulates his kingdom within the sphere of the operator. The operator next imagines himself to be clasping in his right hand a large cross-handled sword, such as is depicted in pictures of crusaders. He holds it point upright and says, "In the name of God, I take in hand the sword of power for defense against evil and aggression," and imagines himself to be towering up to twice his natural height, a tremendous armed and mailed figure, vibrating with the force of the power of God, with which he has been charged by his formulation of the sword of power. He now proceeds to draw the magic circle upon the floor with the point of the sword of power, and he should see in his imagination a line of flame following the point of the sword, consisting of small flames, such as spring up when methylated spirit is spilt and ignited, but of a pale golden color. A little practice should enable this circle of light to be formulated effectually. Keep on going round the circle until it is formulated. The circle should always be drawn deosil, that is to say, from east to south to west to north, in the same way that the hands of a clock would move were the clock laid face upwards on the floor. The contrary way is widdershins, the way in which the witches danced at the sabbats. The deosil movement affirms the rule of God's law in nature, because it is the way of the sun. The widdershins movement repudiates God's rule over nature by moving against the sun. In resisting an occult attack, the whole formula should be tuned to the keynote of asserting God's dominion over all existence, the aim of the operator being to align himself with cosmic law and cause the power of God to deal with the interference. The circle being formulated, the operator, ceasing to visualize the sword but still visualizing the circle, clasps his hand in prayer and, raising them above his head towards the east, prays, "May the mighty archangel Raphael protect me from all evil approaching from the east." Turning to the south, he repeats the same formula in prayer to Gabriel. Turning to the west, he invokes Michael. Turning to the north, he invokes Uriel. Facing to the east again, and thus completing the circle, he repeats the formula of the Kabbalistic cross. This formulation of the magic circle is especially valuable for protecting the sleeping place, the circle being drawn around the bed. It is not necessary to move about the room or shift the furniture in order to draw the circle. It will be formulated wherever it is visualized to be. It is necessary to reaffirm this circle each time the tides change. That is to say, a circle made after sundown will hold good till sunrise, and a circle made after sunrise will maintain its potency till sunset. After the circle has been affirmed a number of times in the same place, its influence will persist for a considerable period, but it is advisable to reformulate it morning and evening during the active phase of an attack. Incense burnt within the circle is very helpful, but care has to be exercised in the choice of an incense. Joss sticks of unknown composition should never be used, as they are usually compounded with a view to assisting manifestation. Good quality church incense, such as can be bought at most church furnishers, is safe and satisfactory because it is compounded according to traditional recipes. Cheaper qualities may not fulfill these conditions. In dealing with elementals or non-human entities, the pentagram or pentalpha is the best weapon. This is a 5-pointed star drawn in a particular way. Pointing the first and second fingers of the right hand, and folding the others into the palm and touching their tips with the thumb, proceed to draw the pentagram in the air, keeping the elbow stiff and swinging the arm at full length. Start with the right arm across the body, the hand about the level of the left hip, and extended fingers pointing downwards and outwards. Swing it upwards as if drawing a straight line in the air until the fingers point straight upwards above the head at arm's length. Now sweep it down again, keeping the elbow stiff until the hand occupies the corresponding position upon the right side to that from which it started on the left. You have now drawn a gigantic V upside down. Next, swing the hand across the body on a rising incline until it is stretched on a level with the left shoulder, pointing to the left. Bring it across the body horizontally until it is in the same position on the right, fingers pointing away from the body. Now swing it downwards across the body till the hand has come back to the point by the left hip whence it started. This is an exceedingly potent sign. The value of the 5-pointed star, the symbol of humanity, is widely known among occultists, but its potency depends upon the manner in which it is drawn. The method I have given is the correct one for banishing. The potency of the sign may be illustrated by an experience of my own in using it, which the skeptical are at liberty to doubt if they wish. I merely mention it for the sake of those who may be interested. I was taking part in some work with an Indian occultist when I became suspicious that all was not as it should be, protested, and was asked to withdraw. I did so, determined to watch proceedings from a distance, and if my suspicions were confirmed, to have an exposé. A few days later, I was sitting in my room one afternoon, chatting with a friend. It was just getting dusk, and we were talking by the light of a gas fire. Suddenly, we were both aware simultaneously of a presence in the room and turned spontaneously in the same direction. My friend sensed an antagonistic presence, and I, being more psychic, saw who it was and had no difficulty in perceiving the form of my Indian associate in an egg-shaped sphere of misty yellow light. I told my friend to quit the room and wait in the hall, and as soon as the door closed behind her, I made use of the pentagram I have described, together with certain names of power that are unsuitable for disclosure in these pages. Immediately, the appearance in the corner by the door shattered and vanished. At the same time, there was a resounding crack, which my friend heard in the hall. I called to her to return, and as she entered, she exclaimed, "Look what has happened to the door!" And we found that one of the panels had split clean in two. It was this that had evidently caused the loud crack we had both heard. I offer no explanation of this incident for the good and sufficient reason that I do not know what the explanation may be. I merely state what happened. My readers can explain it as they please. When it is not possible to seal the room, it is a very useful thing to be able to seal the aura. Stand upright and cross yourself by touching forehead, breast, right shoulder, and left shoulder, saying, "By the power of the Christ of God within me, whom I serve with all my heart and with all my soul and with all my strength." Extend your hands forward as far as you can reach at the level of the solar plexus, fingertips touching, then sweep them round to the back and touch the fingertips together again behind you, saying, "I encompass myself about with the divine circle of his protection, across which no mortal error dares to set its foot." This is an old monkish formula. It is very effectual, but its potency only lasts about 4 hours. There are various other devices which are useful, not only in dealing with psychic attacks, but in any case of undue influence or domination. If you have to interview persons whose influence you find overwhelming, imagine that they are separated from you by a sheet of plate glass. You can see them and hear them, but their magnetism cannot reach you. Visualize this sheet of glass until it appears to you to be absolutely tangible. If you have to associate with persons who distress you, but are not actually interviewing them, imagine that they are separated from you by a brick wall, and say to yourself, "You just aren't there. I can't see you or hear you, and you simply don't exist." When dealing with a person who saps your vitality, interlace your fingers and lay your folded hands upon your solar plexus, keeping your elbows pressed against your sides. Keep your feet touching each other. You have thus contacted all your own terminals and made of your body a closed circuit. No magnetism will go out from you while you maintain this attitude. Your friend will probably complain of your lack of sympathy, however kindly you may speak. If anyone tries to dominate you by gazing intently into the eyes, do not attempt to return gaze, for this only leads to an exhausting struggle in which you may get the worst of it. But look steadily at the spot just above the base of their nose, between the inner ends of the eyebrows. If you are merely dealing with an ordinary bully, you will immediately have the upper hand. If, however, your antagonist has knowledge of mind power, you may not be able to dominate him, but he certainly will not be able to dominate you, and the result will be a stalemate. Do not attempt to dominate him. Merely keep your eye on that spot and wait for him to weary of his attempt to dominate you. You will not have long to wait. By the use of the methods described in the preceding pages, any person of normal courage and mentality, provided he avoids drugs, alcohol, and long periods without food, can, if he does not lose his nerve, wear down any ordinary psychic attack, or in the case of attacks of abnormal potency, can at least ensure himself time to make good his escape and seek help. The sacraments are also a most potent source of spiritual power, and a church where the Blessed Sacrament is reserved, or which is sufficiently old to have been consecrated before the Reformation, is an effectual sanctuary. 19. Methods of Defense 3. Psychic trouble not infrequently arises owing to the formation of an undesirable rapport. In order to understand the nature of this problem, we must consider the whole subject of rapport. We have already considered in some detail the question of telepathic suggestion. Rapport might be considered as the passive aspect of that which telepathic suggestion is the active aspect. It forms, in fact, the basic condition necessary for telepathic suggestion to take place. Two people who are in rapport might be described as astral Siamese twins. Although the physical bodies are independent units, the astral bodies are linked in such a manner that there is free circulation of astral force between them, just as the circulatory system of the mother is connected through the umbilical cord with the unborn child, and the same blood circulating freely through both. This fact explains many important occult phenomena. It is the real key to marriage, and explains many facts in the relationship of parent and child. It also accounts for some important aspects of the relation of pupil and teacher. But not only is it possible for a rapport to be established between two individuals, but between an individual and a group. This fact plays an important part in all fraternity work. It is also possible to establish rapport between a human being and other kingdoms of nature. with discarnate entities, superhuman beings, and, in fact, with any form of life with which an individual can form a sympathetic understanding. There must be some ground of sympathy as the basis for the formation of a rapport, but once formed, it can be developed almost indefinitely. It is a curious fact that if a rapport is long continued, the persons thus united gradually come to resemble each other. We all know the horsey type of man, also the son of the soil of whom it was expressly remarked, "Father's in the pigsty, you'll know him by his hat." When two human beings are in rapport, the less positive of the two tends to lose his own individuality and becomes the pale reflection of the other. It is for this reason that the Western occultist, who values individuality highly, does not take personal pupils in the same way as does the Eastern guru, but prefers to work through ritual with a group because this method is more impersonal. But even so, the individual members of a group will undergo certain changes, whereby they are turned into the group tone, so that there will be a certain common denominator which they all possess. Who cannot recognize the sign manual of the Christian Scientist, the Theosophist, the Quaker? Any system which has group meditation rapidly puts its mark on its members. In this fact, of course, lies much of the value of association with a worthy group. In it equally lies the detriment of association with an unworthy group. Let us consider what happens when a person of ordinary good character becomes associated with a group of degenerate moral tone. He will either find himself in such sharp antagonism to the group mind that he will have no option but to withdraw, or he will rapidly but unconsciously be tuned to the keynote of his new associates. Without his being aware of the fact, his moral sense will have become blunted, and he will accept as a matter of course what he would originally have turned from in disgust. Rapport, once established, other things beside the general feeling tone can be shared. Actual ideas can be transferred from one mind to another as in telepathy, and in the same way vital force can be transmitted. It is this fact which is the explanation of certain types of spiritual healing. When etheric vitality is being transmitted, it is necessary that the persons concerned should be within the immediate magnetic field of each other, but when astral force is in question, this is not necessary. Transmission is independent of space. We are not now considering the legitimate use of this force for healing or for teaching and developing neophytes, so we will not, therefore, consider its modus operandi in detail. Enough has been said to show in what way it works. Let us now proceed to the consideration of the practical methods of breaking such a rapport if, for any reason, it is desired to discontinue its use. To astral vision, the telepathic link appears as a ray of light, a shining cord, or some similar thought form, because it is in this form that it is usually formulated by the person who is making the magnetic link. It sometimes happens, however, if the operator has a high grade of initiation, that instead of connecting the ray direct to the person with whom he desires to be in touch, he will formulate an astral animal at the end of it, to which he transfers a modicum of his own consciousness. This animal form is called a watcher. It does not act on its own initiative unless attacked, when it defends itself according to the nature of the species in whose likeness it is made. The use of a watcher is to obtain a record of what is transpiring, without the necessity of focusing consciousness thereon. When the psychic substance of the watcher is reabsorbed by the adept, he becomes aware of the content of the watcher's consciousness. The disadvantage of this method lies in the vulnerableness of the watcher to psychic attack, and the fact that its projector is affected if it is injured or disintegrated. In dealing with a thought form, always bear in mind that it is the product of the imagination, and is in no sense self-existent. What the imagination has made, the imagination can unmake. If the maker of a thought form has thought it into existence by picturing it imaginatively, you can equally well think it out of existence by picturing it clearly and imagining it bursting into 1,000 fragments, or going up in flames, or dissolving into water and being absorbed by the soil. That which is thought into existence by the imagination can be thought out of existence by the imagination. If what was taken for a thought form resists destruction by this method, it is probably an artificial elemental. Now, there are two such elementals, one kind being ensouled by the invocation of elemental essence into a thought form, and the other by the projection of something of the magician's own nature into it. If it is ensouled by elemental essence, the use of the pentagram will serve to banish it. But if it is of the kind that is ensouled by the magician's own force, another method must be used, known as absorption. Now, absorption is a very high-grade method, and its successful use depends upon the state of consciousness of the user. Each individual has to decide for himself whether, in any given case at a given moment, he is in a fit state to attempt it. Unless he can completely steady his own vibrations and arrive at a state of perfect serenity and freedom from all sense of effort, he should not make the attempt. We will, however, describe the method for the benefit of those who care to try it. Harmonizing himself by meditation upon the Christ, the adept, as soon as he is satisfied that his own vibrations are steady, proceeds to call up before his astral vision the image of the form he intends to destroy. He sees it clearly in all its details and seeks to divine its nature, whether it is a vehicle for malice or lust or vampiric action. These are the three most common, and it can almost certainly be assigned to one or other of these classes. Having discerned the type of the force with which he has to deal, he then proceeds to meditate upon its opposite, concentrating upon purity and selflessness if the force be lust, compassion and love if it be malice, and upon God as the creator and sustainer of all life if it be vampiric. He continues this meditation until he feels himself suffused with the quality upon which he is meditating, until he feels himself so imbued with purity and selflessness that lust causes him to feel nothing but pity, malice causes him to feel nothing but compassion, and in regard to vampirism, he is so assured that his life is hid with Christ and God that he would willingly let the vampire finish its meal in peace if he could thereby help it. In fact, the adept who proposes to perform a magical absorption has to reach the point where he has clearly realized the nothingness of the evil he proposes to absorb, and no longer has any feeling towards it, but pity for an ignorance that thinks it can gain anything good for itself in this way. He desires to uplift and educate and free the misguided soul from its bondage. Until he has arrived at the point when he has no other feeling than this towards his persecutor, it is not safe for him to attempt an absorption. Having satisfied himself that he is ready for the attempt, he proceeds to draw the thought form towards him by pulling in the silver cord that connects it with his solar plexus, if it be a vampiric thought form, or by opening his aura to it and enfolding it, if it be one of the other two types. He literally sucks it in. This process should be done slowly and gradually, taking some minutes in doing so. If it be done suddenly, the adept may not find it possible to keep his own vibrations steady, and then he will indeed be in an unpleasant situation. As the thought form is absorbed, the adept will feel a reaction in his own nature corresponding to the type of the thought form. If it is a lust force, he will feel desire rise within him. If it is a malicious force, he will feel anger, and if it is a vampire, he will feel bloodlust. He must immediately overcome this feeling and revert to his meditation upon the opposite quality, maintaining it until his vibrations are once more fully harmonized. He will then know that the evil force has been neutralized and that there is much less evil in the world. He will immediately feel a great access of vigor and a sense of spiritual power, as if he could say to a mountain, "Be ye cast into the sea," and it would be done. It is this sense of spiritual exaltation and power which tells him that the work has been successfully accomplished. It is, however, advisable to repeat the meditation at intervals for 2 or 3 days, in case another thought form is formulated and sent after the first. As for the sender of the thought form, when the absorption takes place, he will feel that virtue has gone out of him. He may even be reduced temporarily to a state of semi-collapse. He will soon revive, however, but with his power for evil of this particular type considerably reduced for some time to come, and if he have the possibility of reform in his nature, it may even be that he himself will be permanently freed from this type of evil. The great advantage of this method is that it actually destroys the evil, root, and branch, whereas the mere destruction of a thought form is like a cutting off the top of a weed. On the other hand, it can only be done by an advanced occultist, keyed up to the highest pitch. If one is disturbed or harassed, or has in any degree lost his nerve, one dare not attempt it. If the rapport is perceived as a line of light, a cord, or any similar form attached to the solar plexus, the forehead, or any other part of the body, the best way of severing the rapport is to forge a magical weapon and cut it. In fact, if a rapport is felt, The first thing to do is to visualize the cord and try to see where it attaches. The solar plexus is the commonest place. Next, formulate the cross-handled sword as already described and invoke God's blessing upon it. Then visualize a flaming torch and invoke the power of the Holy Ghost, whose symbol it is. Now with the sword, hack through the cord or ray until every shred is severed. Then sear the stump with the consecrated fire of the torch until it shrivels up and falls off from its point of attachment to your body. After such a severing, one must, of course, take the ordinary human precautions to prevent the link being reformed. Refuse to meet the person responsible for its formulation, or to either read or answer letters from him. In fact, cut off physical communications as thoroughly and resolutely as one has cut off astral ones for a period of some months at least. There are occasions, however, when a person is so completely overshadowed and dominated that he cannot perform this operation for himself. The magical operation of substitution can then be performed, if he can find a friend ready to undertake the task. In order to perform this operation, the two friends agree that it shall be done, but the one who is to become the substitute does not tell the original victim when he proposes to undertake the operation, lest that latter should be so completely in the hands of the dominator that he should give the game away involuntarily. Choosing a time at which he is sure his friend is asleep, the substitute concentrates upon him and imagines himself to be standing beside him, and visualizes the cord or ray of the rapport stretching from his friend out into space. If he can visualize its other point of attachment in the dominator, so much the better. He then formulates the sword and the torch as above described, and with these in his hands, he imagines himself stepping right through the line of rapport so as to break it with his body. He must not use either sword or torch for this process, but break it with his own flesh, as it were. Having thus severed it from his friend, he should then go for it with sword and torch with all his strength as it tries to enwrap him, as it assuredly will do, for it resembles nothing so much as the tentacle of an octopus. He should go for it hammer and tongs, making up in zeal what he lacks in knowledge, until it has had enough and begins to curl up and withdraw. The combat, of course, takes place in the imagination, but if a clear and vivid image is produced, it will be effectual. In illustration of this method, I may mention a case I once handled by its means. I was asked if I could help a woman who had been a lifelong invalid, but whose case the many doctors she had consulted were neither able to diagnose satisfactorily nor to help. They all agreed that there was nothing organic the matter with her, and after trying in vain to get her better, they generally united in saying that it was pure hysteria. She suffered from a chronic condition of exhaustion, indigestion, attacks of vomiting, blinding headache, and palpitation of the heart. She was, however, not in the least of a neurotic disposition, but a quiet, sensible, intellectual woman, bearing her sufferings with fortitude. I made a psychic diagnosis and came to the following conclusion, that for many past lives she had been upon the path, and that in her last life, a male incarnation, in order to speed up her progress, she had traveled in the East and eventually took initiation into one of the Tibetan orders, which unfortunately turned out to be upon the left-hand path. Here she learned the Hatha Yoga, which gives control over the functions of the body. In her present life, she retained the powers her training had given her, but not the memory of its technique. Consequently, her emotional states affected those automatic systems of nervous control whose functions are normally not under the direction of the mind. Whenever, therefore, she was emotionally disturbed, her subconscious mentation overflowed into the automatic mind and threw certain of the functional systems of the body out of gear. It is my belief that this explanation affords a key to a good many cases of functional disorder. Many people in the course of occult meditative practices obtain control of the automatic mind, which controls the functioning of the bodily organs. It may be recalled that the famous scientist, Sir Francis Galton, the founder of the science of eugenics, experimented with mental control of respiration, and having obtained it, found that the automatic function had fallen into abeyance, and he had to spend 3 anxious days breathing by willpower and voluntary attention until the automatic function was reestablished. In this particular case, however, there was more than disturbance of function. There was this peculiar and very marked chronic exhaustion. I formed the opinion that a rapport still existed between her and the Tibetan order of which she had been an initiate in her previous life. As is well known to occultists, One returns life after life to the order of which one is an initiate, the rapport being a very strong one. This is one of the reasons why the great mystery schools have no need to make themselves known by advertising. They know their own and pick them up on the astral plane. But while it is an invaluable thing to be under the aegis of a reputable order, it is an exceedingly unpleasant thing to stand in a similar relationship to a disreputable order. In this particular case, it was my opinion that the order to which this lady had belonged in her previous life had sunk to a very low ebb indeed, and its leaders were deliberately drawing upon the vitality of its members. Acting upon this hypothesis, I projected myself astrally in the way I have already described, and visited this lady at night. I perceived that from her solar plexus, as she lay asleep, there stretched a black, elastic, stringy-looking substance that resembled nothing so much as a stick of Spanish licorice that has been well chewed by a small boy. This went off into space. Upon trying to see its further end, I had a brief and far-off vision of a monastery with a Chinese type of roof, perched on a crag among vast mountains. I tackled the situation by the simple expedient of passing in my astral body athwart the line of black substance, thus breaking it. It immediately transferred itself to my solar plexus, and for a moment I felt a surge of tempting thoughts urging me to get this woman under my thumb and exploit her to her full financial capacity. I cast these out and went for the rope of astral licorice in the manner I have described, casting it off and searing the stump, and had the satisfaction of seeing it curl up and disappear into the darkness. I then fell into what I considered a well-earned sleep. I had told this lady nothing of my ideas because I wanted to see whether I could clear up the case by working solely on the occult hypothesis without any admixture of suggestion. Next morning, I visited her to see how she was getting on, and found her sitting up in bed eating a hearty breakfast and looking an entirely different woman to the gray-faced, exhausted creature I had seen the day before. Without waiting for any enquiry from me, she said, "I don't know what has been done, but I feel as if something has been broken and I am free." After breakfast, she got up, went for a stroll, and met the doctor who was attending her in the street. So great was the change in her appearance that he failed to recognize her until she spoke to him. I told her that, in my opinion, she ought to have nothing whatever to do with occult studies, lest she reform the magnetic link with her old order, and also taught her how to prevent her subconscious mind from giving disruptive suggestions to her bodily systems of functional control. For some years she remained in good health, but later, unfortunately, took up the study of occultism again and relapsed into a condition approximating to her previous one, having presumably reforged the contacts with the Tibetan Brotherhood, which had proved so disastrous to her. 20. Methods of Defense 4. There are so many stories of the appearance of guardian angels at moments of crisis that even the most skeptical must admit that there is a case to be answered. There is a tradition in Devon that if Drake's drum, which is preserved at Buckland Abbey near Tavistock, is beaten in a time of crisis, Drake himself will return to lead the fleets of England. Newbolt has immortalized this legend in his famous poem, "Take my drum to Devon, hang it by the shore, beat it when your powder's runnin' low. If the Dons sight Devon, I'll quit the port of heaven and drum them up the channel as we drummed them long ago." The idea of the hero who returns to lead his people, the guardian angel that appears in times of crisis, is sealed deep in the hearts of all nations, and nothing will eradicate it. Innumerable instances were reported by the men returning from the trenches during the war. Let us again refer to the ancient wisdom of the Kabbalah, that storehouse of occult knowledge. We learn here of the good angel and the evil angel of the soul of man who stand behind his right and left shoulder, the one tempting him and the other inspiring him. Translate the dark angel into terms of modern thought, and we have the Freudian subconsciousness. But the Freudians fail to realize that there is also a bright angel who stands behind the right shoulder of every man. This is the mystic superconsciousness, or, in other words, the higher self, the holy guardian angel whom Abramelin sought with such ardor and effort. We all know that, when caught off your guard, there comes a dark temptation from the depths of our lower selves, something atavistic stirs, and we think thoughts or even do deeds of which we would never have believed ourselves capable. We have heard the voice of the dark angel speaking. Equally, in times of dire stress, when we have our backs to the wall and we are fighting for more than our physical lives, another voice makes itself heard, the voice of the bright angel. I have never known this to occur when a man was fighting simply for his physical life. To those who see beyond the veil, death is no great evil, but in times of spiritual crisis, when the very self is being swept away, then it is that the cry of the soul is heard, and something manifests out of the mists of the unseen, manifests in a form that is comprehensible to the one who calls. Whether intense stress induces a temporary expansion of consciousness, a fugitive psychism, or whether a being of its own volition passes through the veil and manifests, I do not know. There are never any details available of these incidents. They take place only in times of dire stress and go as swiftly as they came, leaving no trace except upon the soul. I maintain that even as the lower self can rise up in moments of temptation, so can the higher self descend in moments of spiritual crisis. It is the aim of the mystic to live exclusively in the higher self. It is the aim of the occultist to bring his higher self through into manifestation into brain consciousness. In my flesh shall I see God. Just as surely as the lower self can rise up and betray us to some horrible deed, so can the higher self come to the rescue, terrible as an army with banners. I have already told of the mysterious voice which instructed me how to extricate myself from grave psychic danger. Upon other occasions of stress and strain, I have experienced a sudden expansion or shifting of the level of consciousness. The higher self has descended and taken control. From being in the midst of turmoil, one is suddenly raised high above it and sees all the circumstances of one's life spread out like a bird's eye view, as one might see the land from a high place, and one knows intuitively the outcome of the matter. All emotional turmoil ceases, and one is like a ship hove to, securely riding out the storm. When this occurs to me, the memory of my past incarnations is always vividly present also. It is this simultaneous wakening of the past which makes me feel that the voice is that of my own higher self, and not of another entity. It is my belief that in times of spiritual crisis, the man that has faith in the law of God can rise up and invoke its protection, and a seeming miracle will be performed for his benefit. Yet there can be no breach of natural law. Therefore, such a miracle must simply be an example of the working of a law with which we are as yet unfamiliar, just as an eclipse appears to the savage as a miracle, but to the astronomer as a natural phenomenon which he can forecast with accuracy. What is it that induces this change of control in our lives? We are familiar with the fact that the engine of a car has 3 speeds and a reverse. May it not be that our minds are also geared, and that it is a changing of gears which induces psychism? Are there not times when we get into reverse, and the ape and tiger within us take charge? Behind the physical plane lies the astral plane, and behind the astral plane lies the mental plane, and behind the mental plane lies the spiritual plane, each plane acting as a plane of causation to the one beneath it, and each in turn being controlled from the subtler plane above it. When we change gear, consciousness is shifted from a denser to a subtler plane, and we begin to move among remoter and remoter causes of which the happenings upon the physical plane are the end results. We manipulate these causes, and the results are immediately affected. When we change gear from the physical to the astral, we find ourselves upon the plane of psychic consciousness and the lesser magic. Supposing a psychic combat is taking place between 2 occultists, if one of them is of such a grade that he can change gear again, so that consciousness is lifted from the astral to the mental plane, he will be in the sphere of the greater magic and be in full control of the situation. The other can make no stand against him. But what happens in the case of the rare and mystic soul who can shift consciousness once again and engage the gears of a purely spiritual power? He has outclassed the adept. There are many souls who have this mystical spiritual consciousness, although they have no occult knowledge. Between the higher and the lower modes of thought, there is a great gulf fixed across which they leap precariously. If in a time of crisis they are able to rise up in faith and enter into this mystical consciousness and be still, they will have the upper air of any occultist who relies upon nothing save the technique of occultism. The question of mystical consciousness is, however, outside the scope of our present enquiry, which is concerned with psychic methods and the traditional technique of the occultist. Different temperaments will employ different methods, and the mystical method does not appeal to everybody. The occultist does not ignore the Christ force, however. He recognizes it among the hierarchy of supreme forces of the universe, although he may not be prepared to assign it the exclusive position which it occupies in the heart of the Christian mystic. In the Western tradition, it is symbolized by Tifereth, the central sephirah of the 10 holy sephiroth of the Kabbalistic tree of life. The Christ force is the equilibrating, compensating, healing, redeeming, purifying factor of the universe. It should be invoked in every operation of psychic self-defense, where any human element, incarnate or discarnate, is concerned. Where non-human elements, such as elementals, thought forms, or the Klepeth, have to be dealt with, it is the power of God the Father, as creator of the universe, that is invoked, his supremacy over all the kingdoms of nature, visible and invisible, being affirmed. God, the Holy Ghost, is the force that is employed in initiations, and it should not be invoked during times of psychic difficulty, as its influence will tend to intensify the condition and render the veil yet thinner. There is a very curious aspect of the occult field concerning which something must be said in the present pages, though not a great deal can be revealed, and, to be frank, I do not know a great deal about it myself, but only such aspects as I have actually come across. I have always heard it called the occult police. Others may know it by different names, but I believe it to be a very real and concrete thing, though its organization is not upon the physical plane, nor, so far as I know, are its mundane activities gathered up into any single pair of hands. I have crossed its trail upon a number of occasions, and played my part in its activities, and I have talked with others who have also been concerned in it, and they have always said, as I do, that it is the inner voice and circumstances alone that direct our activities when we cooperate with this mysterious organization. I think myself that it is organized in national units, for people seem to go in and out of jurisdictions, or to be passed on from one to another. In my experience, it has no particular political bias, but concerns itself solely with occult methods applied to criminal ends and offenses against society. One or two illustrative cases may help to make the matter clear. Some complications arose at one time over an Indian occultist who was visiting this country in order to found a school. He was deeply involved in the politics of his own country, and there could be no doubt about it that he disliked the English and all their ways very much indeed. I think that I was the only pure-blooded Anglo-Saxon who was in touch with him. As far as I know, he did not concern himself with mundane, plain political activities, his idea being to organize a meditation group which should pour the regenerative spiritual force of the East into the group's soul of the British Empire, which he declared was in a very bad way indeed. I maintained, however, that the group's soul was not dying, as he held, but very tired, for it was immediately after the war. Moreover, I could not see how anybody who disliked it so very much was going to be able to regenerate it. Nor was I sure that the regeneration was going to be to our taste, if we were to get it. This man, whom I will call X, was of an intense spiritual pride, and his root idea was that England must acknowledge the spiritual supremacy of India and take her spiritual inspiration from the East. I was young and inexperienced at the time, but I began to ask myself what manner of spiritual force was going to be poured in through the channel we were constructing. Supposing during the war a group of English occultists had tried to perform a similar service for Germany, what line would they have taken? Would they not have tried to influence the German group mind, to give up its militarist ideals and concentrate on the League of Nations? Was it not more than likely that our Indian friend was trying to disabuse us of our imperialistic tendencies? Would it not appear to him, smarting as he was under the race prejudice of the white man, that the world would be a much better place for humanity if the English cultivated their own garden and let other people alone? I got more and more uneasy, and X, being a good psychic, detected my uneasiness, and I was asked to withdraw from the group he was organizing. I felt quite convinced that something sinister was being attempted against the group mind of my race, but I had no means of gauging its extent or potency. This was not the kind of tale one could take to Scotland Yard. Moreover, several of my personal friends believed in the bona fides of X and were taking part in the group he was organizing, and I was very anxious not to involve them in any unpleasantness. In my perplexity, I resolved to do nothing upon the physical plane and to invoke the masters upon the inner planes. At this time I was not of a grade which is supposed to have direct access to the masters, but I determined to try and get them telepathically, though I did not know whether those to whom I was trying to telepath were human or non-human, incarnate in physical bodies or discarnate entities, for at that time I was not very advanced in my occult studies. All I had to hold on to was an abstract idea and the knowledge that in previous difficulties I had been able to get in touch with something on the inner planes which had proved a powerful friend. In telepathing, the usual method of getting in touch is to visualize the person you want to communicate with and call him by name. I had nothing I could visualize, and I knew no names. However, I determined to make the attempt as best I might, and, metaphorically speaking, I put my head out of the window of this fleshly tabernacle and called for the police, and I got an answer. The inner voice replied to me very clearly and distinctly, "You are to go to Colonel Y." I was taken aback at this, for Colonel Y was a rather eminent person to whom I had once been introduced, and the last person in the world one would invite to go to mare's nesting. I had no desire to make myself ridiculous by bearding this formidable warrior in his den. My psychological studies had made me familiar with the workings of the subconscious mind and what it can do when dissociated, and I felt that the situation required handling with considerable caution because the results of a misstep might be unpleasant. I therefore replied to the inner voice, "I cannot trust you unless you will give me a sign." The reply came through, "Colonel Y will be at our next lecture. Tell him then." To this I replied, "I know that Colonel Y cannot be at my lecture because his regiment is ordered abroad, and he will have left before it takes place." The answer came back, "Colonel Y will be at your next lecture." "Very well," I said. "That shall be my sign. If Colonel Y is there, I will tell him, and if not, I shall leave the affair to take its course." The day duly arrived when I was to give a public lecture at a certain town. I arrived at the hall in due course, and the first thing I saw was Colonel Y going up the stairs, so I determined to take the bull by the horns, and immediately after the lecture I went straight to him and said, "I have got a message for you." "I know you have," he replied, "for I have been told to expect it." It appears that he was sitting in his quarters one evening with his 2 dogs. They suddenly became disturbed and began to investigate something that wasn't there. He heard a voice saying distinctly to his inner ear that I should come and ask his help, and that he was to give it. He was so impressed by this occurrence that he went to a mutual friend and asked her whether I was in trouble of any sort. At his request, she wrote to me to inquire how I was faring, but mentioned no names, and I, not realizing the significance of the incident, returned a non-committal answer. He heard my story and told me to leave the matter in his hands, which I did. This is a queer enough story of coincidence, but the sequel is even queerer. After leaving Colonel Y, I inquired more of the unseen whether I should take any further steps. The reply came through that for the present I was to do nothing, but that I would be told when further action was to be taken. I learnt afterwards that X had left the country a few days after my interview with Colonel Y. Nothing happened for about 5 months, and then one evening, when I was sitting over my fire in the dusk, I distinctly heard the inner voice telling me that now was the time to make a move in the matter of X, and that I was to go to Mr. Z and tell my story. Now, Mr. Z was a very eminent person indeed, whom I knew of as being an advanced occultist, but whom I had never met. I replied to the interior voice that for me to approach Mr. Z was impossible. I should merely be shown the door, and that unless they could open up the way from their end, I did not see how it was to be done. The answer came through very clearly that the way would be made plain, and it was. A couple of days later, a visitor was announced, an old friend whom I only saw occasionally, and after the usual greetings and exchange of news, he said, "I should very much like you to meet a friend of mine who I think would be interested in your work. May I take you to see him? His name is Mr. Z." Needless to say, I agreed. When I came to the appointed meeting, I said to Mr. Z, after I had been introduced, "I have got a message for you," thinking I might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. He listened attentively, and when I mentioned the name of the Indian, my friend, who was present, exclaimed, "It is a curious thing that you should be moving in this matter at the present moment. X landed in England a couple of days ago." It will be noted that as soon as X left England, I was instructed to hold my hand, and as soon as he returned after an absence of 5 months, I was instructed to commence action again. Unless we are prepared to pull the long arm of coincidence clean out of its socket, we must conclude that some directing intelligence was at work. This is but one among many instances in my experience. Limitations of space forbid me to mention any more. In addition to the occult police, who function solely on the inner planes, there also exist certain groups of occultists who have banded themselves together for the purpose of combating black occultism. I suppose they give themselves different names, but I do not know what these are. I have always heard them referred to generically as the hunting lodges. Upon various occasions I have skirmished on their flanks and looked on at some lively forays. I imagine them to be organized in conjunction with the occult police, and they certainly possess means of obtaining information which point to cooperation from the inner planes. They appear to possess alliances in unexpected quarters, and to be able to pull a remarkable number of strings. What psychic weapons they use I do not know, but upon the physical plane they appear to rely largely upon newspaper exposés and upon keeping undesirables on the move, never allowing them to settle down and organize. Knowing what I do of their methods, I have from time to time recognized their sign manual in various transactions, for which decent citizens have every reason to be grateful. I came across them in a manner which serves to illustrate the way in which occultists can call for information they may be in need of, and the fortuitous train of circumstances that will supply it. As a young girl, at the commencement of my interest in occultism, I came in touch with an adept whom I soon realized to be on the left-hand path, and with whom I served my connection. Shortly after I broke with him, I was watching a gymkhana in company with some friends, among them a student of occultism, and we began to discuss matters of mutual interest. Impelled by I know not what impulse to confide in him what I had never told a soul, I told him of my experiences with the adept I have referred to. To my surprise, he knew all about him. It seems that my new acquaintance was connected with a group of occultists who had taken for their work the hunting out of black lodges. They had already crossed the trail of my black adept and had compelled him to close down, and he had sworn not to reorganize his order. They had had reason to believe recently that his oath was not being kept, and that he had again organized a lodge and was working his rituals, but they did not know where to lay their hands on him. Then here came I, a bit of human flotsam tossed up on a sports field to give them the information they needed at the very moment when they needed it. These things happen too regularly in occultism for one to be able to look upon them as chance. It is my belief that it is possible for anyone who has need of them to get in touch telepathically with this occult police force. The symbol I was taught to use was a black cavalry cross with circle on a scarlet ground. This is pictured in the imagination, and while gazing at it mentally, the call is sent out into the unseen, projecting it from the center of the forehead. Various attempts have been made to prove that the occult fraternities are all directed from a single headquarters, said variously to be situated in Germany, Tibet, Mongolia, and South America. Personally, I do not believe it. I suppose that I have a pretty varied acquaintance with the inner workings of the occult movement, and I have never seen anything whatever that indicated any centralized control, whether for good or for evil. Everything, in fact, points the other way, and indicates that there is no connecting link save that of a common literature, a common idealism, and a set of symbols which, if not common to all sections, are readily translatable by means of well-understood equivalents. The position in the occult field is analogous to that of Protestant Christianity, not Roman Christianity. Occultism has no pope, nor do I think that Bolshevism ever gained any foothold in the lodges, though I believe it tried, as witnessed the application to my own fraternity. The average occultist is not interested in politics. His concern is with things invisible. Moreover, the occult fraternities are too incoordinated and scattered to be formidable political weapons, even if they were imbued with Bolshevism. It has also been said that the occult fraternities are controlled by the Jews in the interests of Zionism. This is quite untrue. There are very few Jews in the occult movement. It is true, however, that the Kabbalah, the traditional mysticism of the Jewish race, is one of the principal sources of Western occultism, and that any occultist working on that tradition must know at least enough Hebrew to be able to transliterate Hebrew script. The study of the modern mystical Kabbalah is almost exclusively in the hands of Gentiles, and Orthodox Jewish scholars know little or nothing of its literature and nothing whatever of its mystical significance. No one has said harder things of the occult movement than I have, and if I thought that there were any organized system of evil influence, I should not hesitate to say so, for I have the integrity of the movement very much at heart. But I honestly do not believe that there is any generalized organization of the occult movement, whether for good or evil, whatever may be one's conception of good and evil. One can, of course, only speak of that which one has seen, but I think it would have been impossible for me to have been as intimately associated with that movement as I have been, and never to have crossed its trail at any point. I have crossed so many trails and seen, I will not deny it, so much that was evil, but this particular evil I have not seen, and I do not believe it exists outside the imagination of people with bees in their bonnets. The true nexus of the occult movement is devotion to a common ideal, but this ideal is approached by an infinite diversity of paths, as many as the breaths of the sons of men. I am sorry for the hypothetical person who has the task of organizing the occult movement, for occultists of different schools cannot be induced to cooperate. Any technique which differs from that which they are used to is suspect. Any unfamiliar contact is black. The great majority of the heads of schools that I have known have sat each in his own circle of light and damned everybody else. Like the old lady who watched her son march past with the territorials, they exclaim, "They're all out of step except our jock." I had once dreamed of a federation of occult societies with an annual convention, but I soon realized that it was unworkable. If occultists cannot be got to organize to serve their own interests, it is very unlikely that they would ever be got to organize to serve anybody else's. The most prevalent abuses of Western occultism are immorality, drug-taking, and the bamboozling of silly women. Its worst faults are credulity, a slipshod scholarship that verges on illiteracy, and a widespread sappiness of intellect. Fortune-telling in all its forms, and some very spurious spiritual healing, constitute another slur upon what should be holy ground. It is difficult to do justice to ideals which one does not share, but it has always seemed to me that the highly colored humanitarianism with which certain sections of the movement are soaked is not an ornament. By their fruits ye shall know them. Such fruits of this as I have seen have appeared to me to be somewhat overripe. The finest minds in occultism are totally unknown outside their own orders. A very common clause in initiation oaths binds the candidate not to reveal the names of his fellow members. If this oath were broken, the general public would get some surprises. Occultism not being in good repute with the general public, men in public positions cannot afford to have their names associated with it. Their interest is therefore carefully concealed, and they only speak of it to those upon whose sympathy and discretion they can count. Those who know what to look for, however, can pick them out readily. Anyone who is accustomed to the analysis of literary style can detect the regular reader of the Bible. Anyone who knows the occult rituals will detect their flavor in the literary or oratorical style of a man who is habituated to their use. Perhaps at this length of time I may be forgiven if I break the oath of the mysteries that binds to secrecy concerning the names of initiates and suggest that the key to the Bacon-Shakespeare controversy may lie in the fact that Bacon and Shakespeare were members of the same order. Conclusion. In the preceding pages, I have endeavored to discharge a difficult task, one that is almost impossible to discharge satisfactorily. Limitations of space prevent me from explaining my concepts step by step and offering proofs thereof. To have done so would have required a library, not a book. I have had to presume in my readers not only an acquaintance with the literature of occultism, but, what is much rarer, some experience of its practice. At the same time, I have endeavored to offer sufficient explanation as I went along to make my pages comprehensible to those whose acquaintance with the subject is but cursory. This book is not, and cannot be, a satisfactory handbook for the treatment of psychic disorders. All it can do is point in directions where enquiries might be pursued with advantage. If it serves to direct attention to certain subjects that badly need investigation, it will have fulfilled its purpose. I may be charged with having revived the superstitions of the Middle Ages. To this charge I must plead guilty, but I must put forward as a counterclaim the plea that there could not be so much smoke without some fire, and that the superstitions of the Middle Ages may repay examination in the light of the recent discoveries concerning the psychology of subconsciousness. Whoever is familiar with the literature of psychic research, abnormal psychology, and the baser aspects of that movement, which took its rise from the inspiration of Christian Science and spread into 100 uncontrolled cults, cannot fail to be struck by the fact that the old witch-finders were getting exactly the same phenomena as we meet with in all these different movements and fields of thought. It has been said that since we find the stigmata of hysteria liberally distributed among those unhappy beings charged with witchcraft, that the witch cult is explained and disposed of. But we may find that a study of the real motives underlying the witch cult would throw light on the hysteria and the allied mental states. It has also been said that history moves in cycles. At the present moment, we are seeing a great revival of interest in psychic and occult subjects. We shall not have to look very much further to find that there are also very promising beginnings of a witch cult in our midst. Let it be remembered that the cases I have quoted in these pages are from the experience of a single person, and I am by no means exceptional in the range of my experience, though I may be less cautious than most in committing myself to paper. If one dip of the bucket reveals so much, what might not be brought up by systematic dredging? Since my treatment of my subject must necessarily be cursory, I should like to direct the attention of my readers to certain books which throw a great deal of light upon the question from various angles. Not only occultists, but psychologists, alienists, and students of psychic matters owe an immense debt of gratitude to the scholarship of the Reverend Montague Summers and the enterprise of Messrs. Rodker for making available exact and complete translations of the principal books upon witchcraft that were written by the men who were actually concerned in stamping out the witch cult and had first-hand knowledge of its nature. In addition to these, I would direct my readers' attention to Projection of the Astral Body by Muldoon and Carrington, which throws a very interesting light upon the manner in which genuine witches attended the Sabbats. I do not mean by these words to imply that Mr. Muldoon is addicted to wizardry, but he certainly possesses the traditional powers, and if he can do these things at the present day, why could not the witches have done them in days past? At any rate, I do not think there is much doubt that the Holy Inquisition would have paid him the compliment of burning him if he had lived during its heyday. 30 Years with the Dead by Dr. Wickstead is another book which gives chapter and verse for personal experience instead of citing authorities and theorizing about them. It is the record of an asylum doctor whose wife is a trace medium and who made a most remarkable series of investigations concerning the nature of obsessing entities. In Dr. Mall's book on hypnotism, some remarkable phenomena are recorded, such as do not find their way into modern books, whether because the investigators are less expert at eliciting them or more cautious in communicating them, having profited by the experience of the earlier investigators. Some of the earlier books on hypnosis and mesmerism yield some very interesting reading to the psychic investigator. Dr. T. W. Mitchell's Medical Psychology and Psychical Research is another book of value to the student, who should be familiar not only with the signs of psychic attack, but also with the signs of pseudo-attack, in order that he may distinguish between them and not be misled into some very uncomfortable errors. To find one has been successfully hoaxed by a lunatic is a humiliating experience. Meyer's Human Personality is, of course, a classic with which every student of psychic phenomena ought to be familiar. There is an excellent abridged edition available for those who do not feel equal to coping with the 2 massive volumes of its original form. Nichols' Dream Psychology and Hart's Psychology of Insanity are 2 exceedingly illuminating little books, both written for the layman and readily comprehensible by him. They throw a great deal of light upon the mechanisms of the mind, and no one should attempt to deal with a psychic attack unless he understands those mechanisms. My own little book, Machinery of the Mind, written under my maiden name of Violet M. Firth, will, I think, be found a useful general introduction to modern psychology. Let us approach the subject of modern witchcraft, neither in a spirit of incredulity nor of superstition, but from the standpoint of the psychologist, seeking to understand the workings of the mind and prepared to discover much that had hitherto passed unsuspected. The End.